Hello, everyone. My name is Ido Akinde. Everybody calls me ID. I love building and helping people build startups. Um, I've done quite a bit of this for the last 4 years, and roughly 1,500 founders in 15 countries on 4 continents have benefited in some way from some direct intervention that I've provided to them, whether that be advisory, mentorship, coaching, or any other type of assistance or support. It's been a really rewarding section of my life journey, and I really have learned a few lessons. I'm a 3-time founder myself. I live in Lagos, Nigeria, and I have come to think of myself, and I like to introduce myself like this to startup founders, as someone with whom a founder from anywhere around the world can sit shoulder to shoulder, virtually or physically or in person, and share whatever challenges that they may be having. Because I have been through the school of hard knocks, and I have quite a few battle scars, quite a few um, scars, as it were, from painful experiences, right? Through any of my 3 previous startups. Founders usually find that perhaps I might have 1 or 2 useful or perhaps valuable insights that may help them unravel the aspect of startup building that they are trying to unravel. And so, what is this all about? I've made a couple of observations. And I think that the way to optimize those observations is to start a new YouTube series that talks about how to build a startup. I'm going to cover the basic things. I'm not going to cover the regular stuff like, administrative stuff. I'm going to be uber focused on strategy. I'm going to be uber focused on helping startup founders think right about how they are building what they're building. I was saying earlier that there are a couple of things that I've observed. One is through coaching as many startups that I've coached, and they're literally in their thousands, I've observed a couple of things. With every new wave of founders that I get to become acquainted with, there is a consistency, there is a pattern in the types of topics that we discuss, right? So there are certain things around customer validation, problem validation, solution validation, team validation, market size, and that we just keep on discussing cohort after cohort, wave after wave. And so this YouTube series is an attempt to document my thoughts around those things and make them publicly available. Special emphasis for founders on the African continent, but in my experience, useful for anybody around the world actually who might be interested. And it's, for me, this would be an opportunity to clear the air on some of these topics so that by the time we have a one-on-one 20-minute, 30-minute, office hours, one-on-one engagement, private coaching session, it's something really impactful and something really worth the time. Think of me as someone who has heard himself say the same things literally hundreds of times, right, to different people. And I see that there is a pattern that this thing keeps on repeating. And I'd like to document some of these thoughts. Obviously, I may not get the 100% quality that I've given some people in the private sessions, but I just like to, put these things down in some kind of referenceable public record. So thereby comes this new YouTube series that I'm calling Dear Startup Founder. Hopefully I can move the needle. I'm very, very passionate about increasing the level of intellectual sophistication or cognitive sophistication for the average African startup founder. I'm really, really bullish on this. I'm really, really invested in this. I've been working on this objective, this goal for a couple of years now. I really, really think that if we improve the way the average African startup founder thinks about building their startup, right? I think that increase, that improvement in cognitive sophistication will show up in the quality of startups that are built, the quality of jobs that are created, the quality of products and services that are created, and obviously the quality of living standards in the society, in the society that Africa then transforms into. Call me a dreamer, call me naive, but that's okay. Just think of me as an incurable optimist, and I'm trying to do my little bit to improve the continent. So without further ado, I'd like to share a few slides. Obviously, this is a pilot episode. This is just introduction and background. This is a pilot episode. I have about 9 broad areas, I call them seasons. And then there are sometimes between 3 and maybe 10, 11, sometimes episodes, which are like subtopics within those broad areas, So I have this layout mapped out and I just try and follow that layout. I'm going to try and keep each of these episodes as short as possible so that there is, a maximum assimilation. I do understand that the average attention span nowadays is really, really short. Things like this have to be less than 5 minutes, to be effective. But hopefully, let's see what we can do with a 5-minute window. So I'll try and keep everything within 5 minutes. If it's going to be more than 5 minutes, I'll break it up and continue in a subsequent episode. So without much further ado, welcome to Dear Startup Founder. The first thing I'd like to discuss is the concept of VentureDNA, okay? I'm sharing my screen now just so that you get a context for what that is. And you should be able to see my screen now. So VentureDNA is, quote unquote, my attempt at, as I said earlier, helping to improve the cognitive sophistication. So there's this joke that I usually crack. When people ask me, "Hey, ID, what do you do? What do you actually do?" I kind of have two versions of an answer to that question. There's a funny version and then there's a serious version. The funny version is I help startup founders clear the cobwebs in their heads. Of course, nobody ever agrees that there are cobwebs in their brains or their heads, right? When you meet them for the first time. But after a few interactions, discussions, and perhaps pointers, to alternative ways to think about certain problems or challenges or knotty issues on the startup journey, people then come back and say, "Oh, I see what you're talking about." So there is talking about clearing cobwebs. Sometime in 2020, some venture capital partners, ran a survey, and the results came out, and it was clear as night and day that there is a set of attributes okay, cognitive attributes that exist in founding teams that survive beyond the proverbial 5-year survival period. And those, like night and day, expected, like a typical graph, cluster graph, those attributes, right, that are present in the founding teams that survive beyond 5 years are absent in the teams that do not survive. So, this really, really, really got my thinking, sparked my thinking and made me start to think, is there a science to startup success? And I think so. There is a tendency for the new generation of startup founders, and many of them are young, they don't have the kind of corporate experience that many of older folk have. There's a tendency for the new generation of startup founders to form the wrong conclusions. So everybody knows that Bill Gates dropped out of school, Larry Ellison dropped out of school, Mark Zuckerberg dropped out of Harvard, right? So people get the unconscious impression, people form the unconscious conclusion that you don't need to go to school, okay, to build a successful startup. Assumption number one. People also sometimes form the unconscious conclusion that you could wing it to a successful startup. Okay. So, sometimes, these are just things that form in our heads unconsciously, right? But actually, like I said, from the data, there is a methodical, systematic, structured way to build a successful startup. Okay. So if you're going to build a startup that will succeed, there is a way to build it, and really follow it for your own benefit or ignore it at your own risk, quote unquote, as it were. I'm not saying that it has to be my formula, but obviously there is a way, there is a how to building a startup, and increasing its chances of success. Success means endurance, enduring beyond 5 years, surviving beyond 5 years, and fundability, becoming attractive to investors. So that's what VentureDNA is all about. VentureDNA is all about helping startup founders, founding teams, acquire those attributes that telltale appear in the teams that survive and are fundable, are enduring and fundable, and are absent in the teams that do not. So is there a way to increase the spread, the prevalence, the occurrence of this set of attributes? Attributes like what? Multidimensional thinking, hypothesis mindset, and a couple of things, and then, all of these things are things that we'll discuss in the course of this, so in a nutshell, that's what VentureDNA is about. And as this is just an intro, this is kind of like what the curriculum is going to look like. Well, please let's not call it a curriculum so that it doesn't feel like a class. It's a chat, it's an informal chat, it's a conversation. This is kind of like what the outline of our conversation, of our discussion will look like over the next few episodes and series and seasons. So I explained the concept of the DNA already, right? That's the DNA of endurance. That's the DNA of fundability. That's the DNA of a successful venture, right? There are certain attributes that are present in founding teams that survive, that endure, and are fundable. And those attributes are not at least partially, if not completely, absent in the teams that do not. The second important concept to speak about is the concept of game theory, right? So those of us that are familiar with behavioral economics, right? Let's not get too complicated here. Understand the concept of game theory. So think about it like this. Whenever you are building a startup, right, and you are seeking investment, right, it would help to think of yourself as just for the purpose of conversation, as a contestant in a boxing match. So let's go to Madison Square Garden or one of the Trump towers, one of the Trump boxing arenas anywhere around the world. Picture yourself as one of the two boxers in a ring, right? And your promoter is the investor, and the other contestants, the other boxer's promoter is the other investor. So technically speaking, whenever you are seeking investment, what you're actually asking an investor to do is to, and you need to always think about it like this, because investors think in terms of game theory. They think in terms of, if I take this action, what's the rational action from the other party? Every investor knows that when they put money behind you, what they're essentially doing is that they are hoping, perhaps validate or checkmate, mitigate the risk by running through some processes. But at the core of it, at the core of it, they're hoping that they're hoping that the minimum required set of attributes that are required to win a boxing match are more prevalent in you than in the other boxer. So think that's exactly what it is, right? Because every investor knows that when they put money behind you or when they put money into your startup, you are not going to be the only startup. Well, you might be the first for a while, maybe first mover advantage, but you won't be the only player in that field for a long time. Some people will come and compete with you. The investor, so most founders are so obsessed with what they're building that they're thinking about, oh, this is what I want to build and this is how I'm going to build it. They're not thinking about the back and forth of competitive or rational competitive action in the form of game theory, but the investor thinks like that. So the investor is thinking, so when I put money behind you, what's the probability that every other person that gets funded in the same space where you're going to play and competes with you will not be as good as you, quote unquote, in the context of the game that you're playing? That's why I use boxing or any other type of activity. So thinking about it like this helps us appreciate the concept of something called an investor mindset, which we'll discuss at full length. We'll touch on it through many of the various modules, but we'll really touch it in module 9, investor communication. So in a nutshell, that's kind of like the intro to what we're going to be discussing over the next few episodes, days, weeks. And I'm excited. I hope to be able to share some of the lessons from the School of Hard Knocks that I've learned, some of the tips and tricks that I have that I've learned, that I have at my disposal, and I hope to be able to help people build successful startups. Thank you very much. Just before I run along, this has been a really long episode. I didn't expect it to be this long. It's almost 30 minutes now. The major modules to cover are customer validation, problem validation, solution validation, team validation, market sizing, early market validation, aka product market fit, mass market validation, aka scale or business model fit, environmental awareness, and investor communication. And then we'll take care of those things. All right. So without much further ado, thank you very much for tolerating my hallucinations on this pilot episode. The subsequent ones will definitely be much shorter. Thank you very much. All right. See you later. Bye.